Gonna stay, how are ye? Welcome to the Candlelit Tales podcast. My name is Aaron.
And my name is Erica. And this is not actually a chat episode. This is just an intro. But we're doing it because we're on the road and I don't have my script. So I can't remember what to say.
We don't have scripts, so we're just going to wing it as an intro. Stay tuned for the story of the Battle of Entry. We're going to release this because we were on the road bringing this story all over, and we brought it to the Cultúrlann in Newmarket. And Leo, the sound man, who is
also a sound man, recorded it for us from the desk, and it sounded really nice, so we wanted to put it up as a podcast. Also because it is Bealtaine, that is why we are on the road. We are heading down to Fionn, Bealtaine, which will be last weekend by the time you hear this, to perform this same story.
And the fires are getting lit on the 6th of May all over the country as well, in Nishnook and in Tarn. There's loads of people doing loads of stuff, and it's fantastic to see, and it's the resurgence of the other big Celtic festival on the opposite side of the year to so one never knows about Halloween. And now we want to try and remind people that Bealtaine is the other side, where the veil is thin. Side.
So watch out for the thin veil, the holy land of Ireland that is full of holes that you can just fall through to the other side anytime if you're not paying attention.
It's very holy.
And enjoy the first half of this story, and we will be back next week with part 2.
And the music for this episodes are played live by Colin Farrell and Alan Hone.
Yeah, and they did an absolutely fantastic job with Barron playing by Aaron, and I did a big boomy drum sometimes. I did a boomy drum. It wasn't mic'd up. You might not be able to hear it.
Thank you as well for those who are supporting us on patreon.com. You can go over to patreon.com/Candlelit Tales to help chip in that, and we are so grateful for you for helping us out. And without further ado,
you know what? We're going to tell you a story. So enjoy.
how are we getting on? That was just our little sound check to make sure you could all hear everything. Can you hear me okay? It's a big mad echo in the room, and it's mad up here.
You know what? There isn't. We had this conversation when we were here earlier. There's a big mad echo on stage.
Yeah.
But down the room, it doesn't sound as echoey, I hope. Hands up if it sounds echoey, actually. No,
good.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Right.
Lovely. Well, how are you getting on? We're Candlelit Tales. My name is Aaron, and this is my sister Sorika. And someone accused us recently of lying about being siblings.
Yeah.
Like, why would we do that?
We were accosted by a lady in Ashford Castle going, "You're not really related, are you? You're not really related. That's got to be a gimmick."
That's a stage thing, isn't it?
She did not believe us. But we really are. We're even from nearby. We're even from Tower. So.
Yeah. So yeah, we're delighted to be here. Thanks a million for Katie for getting on to us on Mill Street Arts and Culture Group, I think it was. I got the name wrong. But anyway, we're delighted to be here, and delighted that you all came out of a Thursday evening. Sure, it's great to have you here.
School night.
So, look, we tell stories. I suppose it was the only way for her to shut me up when I was younger.
Yep.
She'd tell me stories, and the best
We call it
stories,
a qualified success.
the best stories are the ones that last the longest, in our humble opinion anyway. And that's why we keep on telling the old stories. There's always something to fish and find, and they tend to be more significant at different times of year. And so you follow the Celtic calendar, and suddenly you land in some form of story that takes place around that time. Kind of might make sense for your life, or that bit of time you're going through, or just the seasons. So tonight
we're telling a story because we're coming up to Bealtaine, which is May Day, which in the old Celtic calendar was almost equal to Samhain. It was the other half of the year where the veil is thin and the other world is imminent, and everything can be kind of upside down for the night. And fires were lit, and celebrations were had and stories were told. So we're going to tell you a story that starts around Bealtaine and lasts a whole year, and probably ends around Bealtaine as well if it started around Bealtaine. So
we only take about an hour and there will be a break.
Yeah, it's not going to take us the whole year. We will talk to you for about 40 minutes and then there'll be a break and then we'll have a second half.
The highlights, the best bits.
Yeah. You know, the story doesn't last a year. The battle lasts a year. And that battle is called the Battle of Ventry.
And it starts with the Fionn. And the Fionn were out training with Fionn McCool by the Curragh, the flat plains, where he'd watch from the hill of Allen, and he would train the best warriors, the band Fionn, the women and the men alike, in the ways of the Fionn. The training, the single combats, the feats, and the rigorous tests that they would go through on a daily basis. And only the best could join the Fionn, and only the greatest would choose that path. It wasn't always an easy path to follow, giving up land, possession, taking no ownership, living to choose to be led by Fionn McCool, the fearless leader of the Fionn, and to be led all over the place, up to the wild lands in the north and the west, and the boglands in the Midlands. And you'd never get out of there, but you'd finally do. And all the flat plains and beautiful farmlands of the east, and down into Munster, and, well, sometimes they'd land in Dingle Bay. But on this particular day, they were up in Curragh, and Fionn McCool was training them, and they were training a speed race, and the greatest of the heroes of the Fionn were there. His own son, Oisin, who you might remember went off there to Tirnanon, but this is before he left. And his son as well, Oscar of the Many Feats, so called because he had learned so many great feats that he was called Oscar of the Many Feats. Yeah.
There were many of them. They lost count.
Very good names then. And, well, he was fairly courageous, and he'd done so many great deeds at such a young age. There were many stories told of Oscar's great feats and defeats. Well, he always bounced back. Having bounce-back ability was key in the Fionn, you see. Cuilta McRonan, the thin grey man, fastest of all, it was said he could pick up a grain of sand from every beach all over the land in one single day and arrive back to the king of Tara and still display all of these grains of sand. And, well, there was another man there, Can Critter, who's newly arrived. Hello, welcome, sit down. And he newly arrived to the Fionn, and, well, he'd no stories yet told about him, but he was in awe of the heroes all around him. They'd done so many great things, and Fionn McCool, the brilliant warrior with his unbreakable shield and fierce sword, with Bran and Skiola and the mighty hounds by his side. And always he would give them the choice to follow his orders, and always the Fionn chose to follow. And one evening they were gathered around the fire, and Fergus Fionn Vale, Fergus of the sweet speech, well, he was another one of Fionn's sons. He had a few. But he was telling a few stories of the great fights against the King of Lachlan, and how the wars were passed, and how they spent the summer evenings, all of them out, watching the stars, not sleeping indoors. And when winter came by, then they'd be in the house of the kings telling such great stories of battles gone by. And at this time, he was talking about how one might get into the Fionn.
Now, they'd all been through these tests themselves, but they always liked hearing about it, because it would just remind them how skilled they were, how they had taken on that challenge and overcome it. You see, the first test to get into the Fionn was to have your hair tied in 7 braids, because hair was important. And then you would be chased through a forest by all of the Fionn. And if you broke a single twig, or disturbed a bird, or messed up your hair, you could not join the Fionn. And then the second test, well, there would be a pit dug so that only your head and shoulders were sticking out of it. Hair still in the 7 braids, and you were given 1 pole to defend yourself with. And the rest of the Fianna would throw slings and stones and daggers and missiles at you. And if you had one scratch, one bruise, or if you messed up your hair, you wouldn't be allowed into the Fianna. The third test was to run at a full sprint across the flat land, jumping over a stick held at the height of your neck, under one held at the height of your knee, without slowing down, while turning around and pulling a thorn from your heel, without messing up your hair. And after passing those physical tests, there were still the tests of sweet speech and poetry. You still had to recite the old tales, the old poems, so well that you would bring the Fianna to tears. And if you did all of this, you were allowed to join the Fianna. But not everyone who passed joined, and not everyone who joined stayed. Because you see, Fionn McCool was the kind of leader who trusted his followers. Once you were in, you were in. If you managed to get into the Fianna, as far as Fionn was concerned, you were sound. You had good judgment, because you tried to join his club, and you were good at what you did, because you'd managed to get in. So Fionn would tend to leave people to make up their own mind. He might assign a task here or there, or a quest, but he wasn't much of a micromanager, and some people really like that. It was Fionn's opinion that the greatest people need that kind of leadership to thrive. But for some people, Jesus, it was fierce confusing. Because did he want you to do it this way or that way? And you might want like a deadline or something, or a bit of clarity, like, you know, don't let anything from the other world get out unless it's sound. Well, what does that mean? How do you tell? Sometimes the creatures from the other world look nice to begin with. So some people found this confusing, difficult, relying on their own judgment to make decisions. And one such man who was not long in the Fianna was Glas McDrowan.
Now, Glas wasn't necessarily a bad person. He just frequently made a lot of mistakes. He was the type of fella who was constantly making up for the previous mistake by blundering through 3 more mistakes, trying to attempt to not tell anybody about the first one at all and making things 10 times worse.
Yeah.
We all know them.
Never met anyone like that myself.
As that?
No, not familiar.
So he was harmless until he caused...
Until he wasn't.
great harm. And it was, you know, Glas's opinion, if someone asked him a question, if there was something in it for him, then he'd probably answer the question as long as he was getting something for it. And when the High King of Ireland, Cormac MacArt, asked him some very direct questions about the goings-on of the Fianna, led by Fionn McCool, he kind of knew he shouldn't really tell him. He also kind of thought no harm in doing it and buttering the bread on both sides. After all, the king did have an awful lot of mead, and he thought he wouldn't mind a drink. So, you know, he began to drink his fill and tell him all the things he probably shouldn't be telling him about. And sure enough, as he realised, this being Cormac MacArt, that Glas had a loose lip, he filled that lip up with more and more. And before he knew it, he told the king everything he knew about the going on of the Fianna at the time. And when he woke up the following morning, he realised that Fionn really didn't get on with Cormac, and he was now in the precarious position of being, well...
Technically a traitor?
Technically, I suppose, if you want
Technically.
to call it a name. He didn't really like the name, though. He thought maybe he could leave for a while, go away where he wouldn't get killed by anybody who'd call him such terrible names, like a traitor or something like that. Anyway, he had a very bad hangover and a sore head, and he felt very sorry for himself. But he was a brilliant warrior, and so he went off to the continental Europe. He went off and he saw his fame out there, and well, he joined many
mercenary?
Mercenary armies.
Mercenary. There you go.
4 words have crashed at the same time now. So he went off to join a few battles, and well, he was a brilliant warrior after all, being in the Fianna. He had to be strong and fast and lean and clever and quick, and all of these, he had brilliant attributes in the physical sense. Mentally, maybe not so much.
Oh,
Then again,
he was grand.
he was doing very well for himself. And there was a lot of wars in Europe at the time. A lot of kings warring with other kings, and he began to notice a fairly current trend, that the people that were with the king of the world, or so he called himself, Dara Dunn was his name, tended to always win. And the kings on the other side were fairly annihilated and destroyed.
Well, if they offered resistance. A lot of them didn't.
A lot of them didn't. And he began to hosey up to the good side, the big side, the better side, the winning side. And, well, it wasn't long before he managed to find himself into the front of a battle where the king of the world, Dara Dunn, saw an army coming towards him that didn't lay down their weapons. And he unleashed an unbeatable army, the army of the dog heads and cat heads. So called because they, well, probably
They
don't
had
have
dog heads and cat heads.
I think they got it. Yeah, I wasn't going to say.
They're fairly literal about all
Yeah.
of this stuff, you know, back in the day.
The naming technicalities weren't very different.
Yeah.
So
The dog heads had dog heads and the cat heads had cat heads.
he was beginning to realise why it was that everyone was putting down their weapons rather than face the king of the world and just call Dara Dunn the king of the world. Fine, don't eat me with your terrifying army, he would say. And, well, glass being glass, he managed to talk to the right few people, to get into the right few corners. And then he managed to, unbeknownst to how exactly he did it, arrive into the very inner circle of the king of the world. And one day he was sitting down amongst many other kings and queens in the entire room of the war council of the king of the world.
Now, the king of the world, Dara Dunn, he was not a young man at this point, but he was strong and a little bit cold. And he just kind of had a manner that Gloss found a bit off-putting. You know, he'd look right through you, as if he was counting something in the back of his mind always, and you didn't know if you were in the plus column or the minus column. And so on this particular day, he said, "You're from Ireland, aren't you, Gloss McDrowan?"
Me? Yeah, Joe, I am, yeah, that's the one, yeah. He said.
It's a country I've never conquered, oddly enough, it being so small.
Ah, yeah, tiny.
Yeah. Irritating. Tell me, there's a king in Ireland, isn't there? A high king? He has everything pretty sewn up, doesn't he?
Oh, Cormac. Jeez, torn up, sewn up, no, jeez, no. I mean, you couldn't really be ruling Ireland anyway. It's as bad as a bag of spiders. Like, I mean, there's a king in every hill, and they're all fighting amongst themselves. The high king in Ireland is only really a placeholder, really. He's kind of like a peacekeeping governance, I suppose. He's only really used for ceremonial purposes, like cutting the big banners and stuff, you know, like opening super value and stuff. But, you know.
Interesting. So, lots of warring factions, you say? Gosh, that's very interesting.
I mean,
Tell me more.
it wouldn't be too bad, only for the fact that the Fionn are there. If the Fionn weren't there, you know, it'd be terrible altogether. But like, Fionn McCool, the greatest hero of all Ireland, you know, leading the most deadly army, there's no reason why, you know, you couldn't understand that Cormac McCart and Fionn wouldn't see eye to eye, having a big mercenary army more powerful than the king in the whole country. And there's a bit of a, you know. I
So
think
the
there was
mercenary army and the king are at odds,
Right, yeah.
and the many smaller powers are in flux. So it's never really been invaded, Ireland, has it?
Ah, yeah, loads of times. But sure, the Fionn always fight them off.
Good for them, I suppose. And tell me, why do you think the Fianna have had such great success?
Oh, well, you know. few reasons. Fionn McCool's very good and very fierce warrior. I mean, also Ireland is very hard to invade. Like I see the way you bring in loads of ships, you land them down there on the coast of countries, and you unload massive amounts of armies. You see, the west coast of Ireland is bonkers. There's cliffs and wind lashing, and sure, you'd be mad trying to land a fleet of ships that size in Ireland. Like, be bonkers, be mad, totally mad.
I've heard.
Yeah. I suppose it could be done, like, technically. There's a few spots, if you were looking for it.
Say more.
You have to know the spots. There's very few, really. Like, I mean, if you went up to Donegal, but sure, the whole coast there, you'd float up against the cliffs of Mourne in no time. I mean, the one white strand that I could think of now is down in the south, and you wouldn't have to be circumnavigating the country, like, you know what I mean? Like, you just can land in there nice and quiet on a good evening, like, you know, on a bad one. A storm might blow you off away. But I tell you, there's a good, nice strand, huge now, down in Dingle on that peninsula now, yeah. Tucked away there, easy enough access into Munster, and you could bring it the whole way in there now, if you wanted to, hypothetically, like, you know what I mean? Like.
So, that's decided then, my war council.
That's decided.
Make your preparations, send for your armies, the king of the Tiber, send for your sorcerer's daughters.
Sorcerers?
King of France, king of Spain, king of the Marches.
Yeah.
And we will invade Ireland.
Oh.
And so it was. The king of the world called on all of his vassal kings to gather up their armies, to put in their provisions, and to get into their boats. And under Glas's direction, they sailed for Ventry Bay, that nice white strand, that nice calm bay. And in the holds of all those ships, everyone on board could hear strange, snarling, hissing noises from the cat heads and the dog heads. But as they sailed straight into the teeth of a storm. Now, Dara Dunn was pretty sure that this was really going to be the only challenge that they had. He could probably find his way in and play these different powers off against each other in Ireland, and he didn't think they'd put up much resistance one way or another. So they sailed on.
Now, word had gotten to the Fionn and Fionn McCool, and that there was some form of invading army coming towards them. There was something coming. And so Fionn did what he always did when he knew there was an invasion coming, and he sent out messengers to all of the coast, the fastest, to Dardun, his most trusted of messengers, to Quilta, the fast thin man, Oscar Oisín, his own sons, every one of them, including Con Critter, the newly joined. And he was sent all the way down to, you guessed it, Ventry Bay. And he was there looking at the white strand, and he saw the sand dunes and Mount Brandon behind him. Before it was called Mount Brandon, it was called something else then. But anyway, he was looking around the place, and it was all very lovely. And then he saw on the coast, he saw the clouds rolling together, the wind crashing against his face, the waves lashing against the coast. And he heard thunder roll over the waves. And as he heard and saw the lightning crack, rain flash, and winds crashing against him, the thunder that rolled now, he knew there was a storm coming in. And as the rain came down so heavy it soaked his skin in mere moments, he ran to take cover, burying himself deep down into the ground by those big sand dunes and trying to shelter and hovel in a hole to keep himself some form of warm, not moist.
Warm. You don't want to be moist in a storm.
He was very moist already. He was trying to stay warm, but he couldn't. He was very cold. And he tried to close his eyes and let that storm build and pass him over. And in that drifty twilight night, he fell into a deep and dark slumber. not believe his eyes, because there was not a bit of that bay that was not a boat. It was all a boat now.
You could have walked across where the water would have been and not gotten your feet wet. There were so many boats crammed in deck to deck.
You could walk from one brow to the next without even touching the sand. He had never seen so many boats gathered. His one job was to alert the Fionn, who were gathering together at Swim Two Birds, all there to get the note to go and fight wherever this invasion was landing. His one thing to do, he had slept through.
There's one chance.
This
Be
was
a hero.
The thing he was supposed to do, to alert the Fionn and to tell them. And this was his one chance to be a great hero. He really only had one job. It was not to fall asleep. And it was hard to fall asleep in that storm, but he did it. He was lulled into that kind of, oh, it's raining outside, that's nice.
Sleeping it out.
And we've all been there. It's a terrible feeling. The heart
Stop
just
saying we've
drops.
all been there.
We've all been there.
Some of us haven't been there. Some of us set alarms.
AM, PM are very confusing, all right? So, look, oh no, it's the wrong one. So he woke up and he was absolutely terrified. His one chance to make a name for himself. It's one chance for his name to be on the lips of storytellers after this night. Fergus Fionn was supposed to be telling stories about him around the Bealtaine fires, but no, he'd messed it up. And, well, he had an idea, a great idea, a panic-stricken idea, which is how you know it's a very bad idea.
Yeah, no, it's
They're the
best
worst ideas you come up with when you're freaking out. But he came up with a great idea that he thought was a great idea, and he was freaking out. He said, I know what I'll do. I'll pick up my shield and my sword, and I'll go single-handed, and I'll face those. And he saw fires burning, and he realised there was a group out from the boats now, pillaging and plundering the nearby forts and sending on cattle and sending on all of the provisions from these forts to feed the army below. And he knew what he'd do. He'd go herring off, single man, one against 100 of them, and he'd make his name, and he'd die trying, and they'd tell stories of how Crither faced the king of the world on his own. He wasn't sure who'd tell it, because there was no one to tell it.
Somebody would figure it out,
but somebody would figure it out. He was damn sure
From
he
the
had
forensic
faith.
evidence.
He had faith. He had faith this story would last. And so he went tearing off, as only a young man with a bad idea can do. And he went tearing around the corners of the sand dunes and ready to throw his life away. And suddenly,
there stood 3 women. 3 young, rather attractive women who looked up and smiled and rather creepily spoke in unison and said, Crither. It's you.
now, if you've ever had someone talking to you from 3 different places at the one time,
Unnerving. Anyway, Con was a little bit unnerved,
didn't know where to look.
but they said, we've heard of you. We've heard stories about you.
What
and
stories?
we decided to help you.
Sure, I've done nothing. Sure, there's no stories about me. I just joined the Fionn. The only story that I have is that I just fell asleep when the king of the world landed his fleet of ships on Bantry Bay.
See, men tell stories about death and glory. Women tell different stories. We've heard stories about you. And we've decided we're going to help you.
All right.
We've decided that you are going to survive this battle, no matter how long it lasts. See, we came over with the fleet.
Oh.
And we're going to create a healing well for you. And every day at the end of the battle, if you bathe your wounds here, you and one other, but you need to keep it a bit quiet, because we only have so much healing magic to go around.
Just the one friend.
Just the one friend. Bring a friend. You can have your wounds restored at the end of every day and go back into the battle.
Just thanks very much. That's a lot of help, considering I'm on my own anyway. So, yeah, that'll be a huge help. I appreciate it. Nice one.
Yeah, no bother. But also, because today is Bealtaine,
Oh yeah.
the veil is thin and the magic is stronger,
Right.
we can give you a little bit of extra just today. So if you run off into battle now, off you pop. We'll see you after.
Sure. I'll just carry on doing what I was about to do. So.
Yeah.
And he went herring off into the battle, fully blooded now, delighted the fact that he would now have a pool to heal himself in, and he saw the King of France.
Spain.
It was the King of Spain. Always tricky between France and Spain. Now, the King of Spain was there and he was gloating over having just robbed 3 forts in a row and barreling off all of the provisions to bring back to the King of the World. And when he saw Con Critter, he froze and he began to marshal his army to run away from Con Critter because what he saw.
Back on the ship, Dara Dun, the King of the World, was shocked to see the King of Spain and his whole army turning tail and running away from one single Irishman who did look a little crazed, but not crazed enough to scare away a whole army. And so he called Glas MacDrowan to his side and he said, which of the heroes of the Fianna is that? Is that Fionn McCool? Is that Oscar of the many feats? Why are they running away from one man? But Glas didn't recognise this one.
Glas just looked at him and said, "Jeez, I don't know who that is. It's not Oscar, it's not any of them. I don't know who it is. I've never seen him before. He's a young fella, but I don't know what's going on."
Go find out.
So Glas went down and jumped onto the ground, and as he saw the King of Spain running away, he saw this man was surrounded by a ferocious army. And then he got back on the boat, and then the
army
disappeared. And then he did what only I can imagine is a kind of foot on, foot off, foot on, foot off situation. Army there, army not there. Army there, army not there.
It was a magic spell.
Magic spell.
It was a magic spell.
It's a magic spell.
An illusory army backing up Con Critter as he chased off the King of Spain from more raiding and pillaging.
And Glas said, "Well, it is Bealtaine after all, you can't be trusting your senses." So he got down onto the beach and walked towards this hero of the Fianna that he did not recognise. And he said, "How are you? Who are you now?" And, well, Con Critter stopped, shocked to hear an Irish voice. And he said, "Who am I? Who the hell are you? You just led the King of the World here." And Glas turned around and said, "Oh, yeah, that. Look, we'll talk about that in a moment. Tell me your name there, young fella." He said, "My name's Con Critter. I'm from Tara Lucra. Bran's me father, the king up there." And Glas said, "No way, I'm from Tara Lucra." And Glas said, "No way." Con said, "Yeah, that's mad."
So they were cousins. As it turned out, that went on for a while. You know the way it is.
Jesus,
do you know your man who's related to your one who knows himself?
No way.
Down the road from What's-His Face.
They
They were first cousins.
No
was
way.
what it
Oh,
turned
they're
out
dead.
to be.
They're dead now. Oh, yeah, jeez, that's sad. Okay. Well, so they exchanged stories. And then they went, sure, that's why you sound exactly like me. It's all making
It's
sense.
not because Aaron can only do one voice in many accents.
Excuse me. Too
Well,
many.
I said many accents. You can do at least 3.
So they exchanged stories and realised that they were from the same place, and they both joined the Fianna. And Glas explained that he had, well, kind of messed up with Fionn and kind of told the king all the secrets of the Fianna and had to run away because he'd get killed by Fionn. And Con Critter looked at him and said, "Don't you know Fionn's a sound fella? Don't you know that you could have just gone and talked to him and he'd have probably, punished you or something, but like..."
He'd have sent you on a quest.
Yeah.
He'd have made you get something from the Tuatha Dé Danann, but like...
Something like. You might have had to risk your life, but it'd have been grand. Anyway, he's sound. You should have just done that. Now, you can still turn tail and fight with me, because I'm on my own. And I can do it with a hand, to be honest. And Glas said, "You know what? That's exactly what I'll do. I love turning coats and changing colours and flipping around. So yeah, let's do it. Right. I'll just go up and have a word there with the King of the World."
Just to be on the up and up. So he came back to Dara Dun and said that he was going to change sides. And Dara Dun looked at him, and Glas got the distinct impression that he was being moved from the plus column into the minus column. And the King of the World said, "All right, that's fine. I'd like you to come back at the end of every day and tell me who of the Fianna has died. And if you do that, we'll say no more about it." And Glas agreed to this and asked the King of the World to send out 2 warriors for himself and Con Critter to fight in parallel single combat. Double combat? Something like that.
Double single combat.
Double single combat.
Double
So
singles.
the singles and the doubles.
Single
They
doubles.
went out and they fought against 2 warriors of the King of the World's army, and they won. And the next day another 2 were sent out, and the next day another 2 after that, and the third day Dara Dun, Fionn's messenger woman, turned up at Ventry and said, "What are you doing?"
We're fighting the King of the World.
"No, I see the army of the King of the World.
Yeah.
Your job was to see where they landed and then come and get the rest of the Fianna."
Oh yeah, we forgot about that.
Yeah. You did.
We're doing this single double combats.
She kind of hopped their two heads together lightly, just to say, oh my God. Right, I'm going to go get Fionn and the Fianna from its swim two birds.
Great idea.
I suppose you two keep doing what you're doing, although,
Sound.
honestly, lads, God.
Oh, wait, before you go. No, Con Critter had a solemn look on his face, because each night they've been going and healing themselves in the king and the daughter of Tiber's healing pools, and both Glass and Con had been healed and renewed every time they went back into the fighting. And even still, Con and Glass, well, they were worried for the sake of Ireland, because they heard the sounds from the bellies of those boats, and the growling and the snarling and the baying for blood from the cat heads and dog heads. And Glass had told Con all about it. No matter how well they did in their single fighting, there was no standing against the king of the world and this army. And so Con told Dardov to go to his father.
Dardov, actually.
Dardov, that's what I said?
Daradon is the king of the world. Dardov is the messenger.
Not
Everybody in this
Duller
story
Dorfa.
has a name that begins with DD, and it's really confusing.
Duller Dorfa. No, he's next.
No,
up.
he's in the second half. We're not at Dollar Dorfa yet.
Yeah.
No.
There's a test at the end of it, to tell you.
Dardon.
Do you make sure you
Dardon
remember
is the
what-
messenger. No, Dardov is the messenger.
Look,
Daradon is the king of the world. Jesus. Anyway,
the young fella, anyway, turned to your one and said, listen,
that's what we'll do.
very
Yeah.
important message for you, right? Go to my father, Bran McFowle, and tell him he has a favour to call in with the other crowd. And we know it's a bit risky and all, but he might know the right mound to go to speak to one of the She under hill. And if he can get any form of attention there, beg them to give us a hand, because I'm not going to lie, we're up against it, like. Now would be a great time for intervention.
So, Dardov, Fionn's messenger, she said, all right, I will. And on her way back to its swim two birds, she called in on Bran McFowle and Tara Lucra. And she said to him that his son was in trouble, his son who had left his family and joined the Fianna, but still his son. And Bran McFowle said, all right, leave it with me. I'll put a few strings, I'll shake a few trees, I'll see what turns up. I'll make you no promises. And so, with that, she had to be content. And she went off to get Fionn, McCool, and the Fianna. Now, in those days, they didn't line up in rows and march to the sound of a drum. That was not how the Fianna travelled across the land. They lived outdoors from Bealtaine to Samhain. They lived off the land. They hunted, they fished, they were as at one with it as any human beings can be. And so when they walked through the land, it was like the countryside itself was moving. And that was what it looked like to the king of the world and his army from the decks of their ships. It looked like people started to melt out of the sand dunes and the tall grasses, out of the forests at the side of the coasts. And as they came, they were all of them speaking the same chant. Strength of limb, purity of heart, deeds to match our words, the doored Fionn, the call of the Fianna. And as they arrived, well, you might have a second thought about invading a land that could come to life like that. As they stood there, and it seemed like the hills themselves were speaking against the invaders, warning them back, warding them away. And the Fianna arriving at the beach. Well, they looked up at the king of the world. They looked at those ships laid out across the bay. They could hear the snarling from underneath. But even they were not prepared for the fright they got. See, the king of the world had only been waiting for the Fianna to arrive, knowing that these were the only real opposition he was going to face. The High King didn't have much of an army. All those little provincial kings, he was not rating them. But this was the Fianna, and now that they were all here, he gave the word. They opened the hatches, and out boiled and surged the inhuman army of the king of the world. The cat heads and the dog heads, gripping weapons in their hands like men, but with faces of animals, with eyes blank and hungry, with no will of their own, with nothing in them but an instinct for savagery and cruelty and blood. And they came racing, howling, snarling up the strand towards the Fianna.
Fionn McCool gathered all of them there then. And though he was a bit hoarse, because he'd been running for a long time, and he was out of breath, but he was clearing his throat. And he gathered them all together that day, and he said, "We will not survive this fight. We can. And we will face this fight together anyway." And as he tried to muster the enough energy to give one last speech, to bring the valor back into the Fianna, he gave the signal to have a break.
So we're gonna take 5. We'll be back. Thank you.
This podcast was produced and edited by Oisín Ryan. You can find out more about us on our website, candlelittales.ie.
And we're on all the social media, so like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Candlelit Tales, or send us a message to get onto our mailing list.
For more videos and live streams, like and subscribe to our Candlelit Tales YouTube channel, which now has a Candlelit Tales for Kids playlist, #Candlelit Tales.
Liking and subscribing to our channels really helps us grow and get to more people. And if you're able to give us more direct support, you can chip in a few bob at patreon.com/Candlelit Tales, or make a one-time donation through the PayPal button on our website.
We also do really like to hear back from you with any questions, requests or comments. Leave them in the section below. If you want to find out about our courses, anything like that, just drop us a line.
And we especially appreciate you listening.